He was a billionaire who commanded empires. She was
I
the
have wanted
cleaner
this
who
for
ignored
so
him,
long.
trapped in an elevator. Their pretense fell away, sparking a forbidden connection that would
I
defy
have
every
wanted this for
expectation
so
and
long.
rewrite every headline. Hello, bestie. Please stay with me as I unfold this interesting
I have
romantic
wanted this
story.
for so
If you
long.
enjoy the story, please support us by subscribing to this channel and hit the notification button for more.
I have
Thank you.
wanted this for
Grab
so
your popcorn,
long.
sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. Chinedu Chinex Okonkwo surveyed his Lagos empire from the 50th floor, a king in a glass castle. At 35, his name was synonymous with disruptive tech and formidable wealth. Yet, his focus was shattered by a quiet intrusion. Amara, the evening cleaner, moved with an efficient grace that fascinated him. She wasn't like the women who vied for his attention at galas. She was a portrait of serene self-containment, leaving only the scent of lemongrass and the gleam of polished surfaces in her wake. He watched, mesmerized, as she hummed an old high-life tune, utterly unaware of his gaze. Chinedu Chinex Okonkwo was a man who conquered. Markets, competitors, innovations, they all yielded to his relentless strategy and vision. The unexplained indifference of his office cleaner, therefore, presented not a trivial annoyance, but an intriguing challenge. Problem to be solved. He approached it with the same analytical rigor he applied to a hostile takeover. He began orchestrating his schedule to ensure he was still in his penthouse office when the evening cleaning shift commenced. The first evening, he heard the soft squeak of her trolley wheels before he saw her. He pretended to be utterly absorbed in a complex financial report on his monitor. Amara entered, her movements efficient and quiet. She started with the empty glass meeting room, her back to him. Chinex cleared his throat. She paused but did not turn. The floor is exceptionally shiny today, Amara, he said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast, quiet space. You do remarkable work. She half-turned, offering a sliver of her profile. Thank you, sir. The words were polite, neutral, and carried the finality of a closed door. She immediately resumed her work, spraying and wiping the glass table with a rhythm that suggested his comment was already forgotten. He tried again a few days later, commenting on the weather as she emptied his wastepaper bin. Lagos heat is something else today. I hope it's not too much to handle. It is the same for everyone, sir, she replied, not looking up as she tied the bin liner with a precise, efficient knot. Each attempt was a pebble dropped into a deep, still well. There was a faint splash, a ripple, and then nothing but the same profound silence. His compliments, which made board members blush with pride, seemed to evaporate before they reached her. Frustration began to prickle at him. Perhaps her resistance was economic. Maybe she suspected his intentions because Head offered nothing tangible. He decided to be direct and generous. He purchased the latest, most expensive iPhone, the kind his socialite acquaintances queued for. He left it in a sleek box on the center of his immaculate desk, with a simple, handwritten note on his personal stationery. Amara, a token of appreciation for your consistently excellent work. C.O. He made a point of leaving early that day, a small, satisfied smile playing on his lips. She couldn't return it if he wasn't there. She would have to accept it. The next morning, his smile vanished. The phone box sat neatly, perfectly centered, on his assistant's desk. What's this, Taupe? He asked, his voice tighter than intended. Taupe looked slightly nervous. Amara from cleaning dropped it off last night, sir. She said you must have forgotten it on your desk and she didn't want it to get lost. Chinex stared at the box. She hadn't even left a note. She had simply, politely, and definitively given it back. The rejection was more humiliating through a third party. Annoyance now fueled his strategy. Was she truly incorruptible? He devised a test. As he left one evening, he passed her in the hallway. With a deftness Head learned negotiating handovers of confidential documents, he let a fold of high-denomination Naira notes, enough to cover months of her salary, slip from his pocket onto the polished floor just meters from her cleaning cart. He didn't look back. He was certain. Anyone would be tempted. Perhaps she would keep it, and his next step would be to gently let her know he knew, establishing a bond of shared, unspoken secret. The following morning, his head of security, a stern former DSS officer, was waiting for him. "Mr. Okonkwo," the man said, holding up a transparent evidence bag containing the exact fold of notes. "One of the cleaners found this last night and submitted it to lost property. Given the amount, I'm required to log it and inform you directly." Chinex felt a strange heat on his neck. She hadn't just returned it. She had followed official protocol to the letter, robbing the gesture of any personal connection whatsoever. He was no longer a man giving a gift. He was a careless client whose property had been duly logged by a scrupulous employee. The briefing room debrief. Leaning back in his Herman Miller chair, Chinex stared out at the Lagos skyline. His campaign was an abject failure. Proximity, praise, generosity, temptation. Nothing had worked. But where a lesser man might have given up, Chinex's fascination only solidified into a hardened resolve. This was no longer mere attraction. It was a complex puzzle. Who was this woman who operated on a moral code so rigid it repelled his wealth like water off a waxed canvas? Her silence wasn't shyness. It was a fortress. Her avoidance wasn't fear. It was strategy. He didn't know her story, but he knew her character. And it was the most formidable and desirable thing he had encountered in a very long time. The challenge was accepted. He just needed to find the right weapon, the right angle of attack to breach the walls without destroying the magnificent fortress itself. To Amara, the towering Zenith Tower wasn't a symbol of aspiration. It was a meticulously mapped battlefield. Every evening, she crossed its threshold not as a guest, but as a soldier on a defined patrol route. Her weapons were spray bottles and microfiber cloths. Her objective was simple: complete her duties with invisible efficiency, collect her pay, and leave. The greatest threat to this mission was not the grime or the dust, but the attention of the man in the penthouse office. Her mother's voice was her constant strategist, a steady drumbeat of warning in her mind. It had been her mother, a nurse who had spent a lifetime serving in the private homes of Lagos elite, who had schooled her in the unspoken rules of this world. "Doremi, listen to me," her mother had said, her hands gently braiding Amara's hair as she prepared for her first day. "These people, they live in a different sky. We are on the ground. To them, we are part of the scenery, a useful tool, never a friend. And for a woman like you, never a plaything." "Mama, you make it sound so dangerous." Amara had laughed, young and confident. "It is," her mother's voice had turned grave. "A rich man's attention is like a sudden rain in the dry season. It feels like a blessing, but it washes away the topsoil and reveals the sharp rocks beneath. It never ends well for the cleaner, the nurse, the driver. You will be a story they tell at a party, and you will be left with a spoiled reputation and a broken heart. Your pride is your only capital. Guard it." Those words were the foundation of her fortress. Every move Mr. Okonkwo made was analyzed through this lens. His sudden presence in the evenings? Not a coincidence. It was the bored predator circling, testing the fences. His compliments on the shine of the floor? Not genuine appreciation, but the equivalent of tossing a scrap to see if the dog would jump. They were currency he was used to spending for a moment of attention, and she refused to be bought so cheaply. The iPhone had been the most blatant assault yet. She had stared at the sleek box on the vast, empty desk, her stomach clenching. It was a test of her greed. He was trying to find her price. The anger that flashed through her was hot and sharp. Did he think her so easily purchased? That her integrity was a commodity? She had picked it up as if it were a live scorpion, handling it only with the cloth in her hand, and delivered it to the assistant with a perfectly rehearsed line about it being forgotten. She made sure the transaction was witnessed, documented, and stripped of any intimacy. The money he dropped was the final, insulting confirmation. It was a trap laid for a dishonest person. Had she taken it, he would have owned her. He would have had a secret to hold over her, a lever to apply pressure. Instead, she had weaponized his own infrastructure against him. By handing it to security, she transformed his ploy into a simple matter of corporate procedure. She was not a participant in his game. She was an employee following the employee handbook. Her life outside these glass walls was too real, too precious, to risk for a billionaire's fleeting whim. Her dreams were not small. In a small corner of her shared apartment, a sewing machine and bolts of vibrant Ankara fabric whispered of her true passion, Amara designs. On weekends, she meticulously crafted stunning outfits for a small but growing clientele of middle-class women who appreciated her eye for pattern and fit. Every naira she saved from this cleaning job was a brick in the foundation of her future boutique. Mr. Okonkwo, with his casual power and disruptive interest, was a storm threatening that fragile construction. He was a man who was used to getting what he wanted, and she was a woman who could not afford to be had and then discarded. So she fortified her walls. She perfected the art of the invisible shield. She kept her gaze lowered, her responses polite and terminally neutral. She moved through his space like a ghost, leaving no emotional trace, only physical cleanliness. She became a master of evasion, timing her entry into a room to coincide with his exit, using her cleaning cart as a physical barrier. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was her strongest defense. Her avoidance wasn't fear. It was a calculated strategy for survival. She was the fortress, and she would not surrender her gates for anything less than an army of genuine respect. Something she was certain a man like Chinedu Okonkwo had no knowledge of how to muster. The change began subtly. The usual relentless Lagos sun was first muted, then entirely swallowed by a rolling tide of bruised purple and gunmetal gray clouds. From the 50th floor, Chinex watched the transformation. The bustling city below, usually a vibrant tapestry of life and noise, began to move faster, its rhythms shifting from the steady hum of industry to the frantic staccato of preparation. The air, usually still and climate-controlled in his office, seemed to press against the glass, heavy with impending violence. It was the first true storm of the season, and it carried a strange electricity that seeped through the walls. Chinex had been distracted all afternoon. His attempts to focus on a merger proposal were constantly interrupted by the memory of Amara's silent rebuff of the money. The image of his security chief holding that evidence bag was a needle in his pride. Head left the office early, a rare occurrence, hoping a change of scenery would clear his head. But at home, in his minimalist mansion in Ikoyi, the silence was louder. The storm brewing outside mirrored his own internal frustration. He paced, the events of the past weeks replaying in his mind. He wasn't a man who failed. He deconstructed, analyzed, and conquered. And then he remembered. The original, signed copy of the very merger agreement he'd been reviewing was still in his office safe. His lawyer needed it first thing in the morning for a filing. It was a flimsy excuse, and a part of him knew it. He could have sent Tope, his assistant, or even a security guard with the combination. But the thought of the empty, storm-lashed tower, and the possibility that she would be there, it was an irrational pull, a compulsion he couldn't explain. He told his driver to bring the car around. The man's face, usually a mask of professional neutrality, showed a flicker of surprise. "Sir? The weather reports are saying it's going to be very bad." "It's a short trip," Chinex said, his tone brooking no argument. "I won't be long." In the staff locker room, a shift to keep, Amara tightened the wrap of her headscarf and sighed. The other cleaners were abuzz with anxiety, talking of flooded roads and downed power lines. "Just go home, Amara," said Chioma, an older woman who had taken a maternal interest in her. "Mr. Bigman CEO won't notice if his trash is emptied tonight." Amara shook her head, stuffing her change of clothes into her locker. "He might, and if the power goes out, the alarms might fail. It's better the office is empty." It was a logical reason, but her real reason was simpler, harder to admit. She needed the hours. The money for a new, industrial-grade sewing machine was almost saved. One missed shift was a setback she couldn't afford. A storm was a temporary inconvenience. Poverty was a constant siege. She clocked in, the sound echoing in the nearly deserted staff area. The usual evening hum of the building was gone, replaced by an anxious creaking as the wind began to whip around the structure. She pushed her cleaning cart into the service elevator, its fluorescent light flickering once, a ominous warning she chose to ignore. The convergence. Chinex's Mercedes sliced through the now empty streets, the wipers struggling against the first heavy drops of rain. He felt a thrill that was entirely out of place. This was foolish, reckless, and yet he hadn't felt so acutely alive in months. He pulled into the underground garage, the sound of the storm muffled to a roar. He took the private elevator, the one that went straight to the penthouse, its quiet luxury a stark contrast to the chaos outside. Amara, having finished the lower floors, saw the indicator light above the private elevator ping. He's here. Her heart sank. Of all the nights, she considered abandoning her cart and leaving, but that would mean facing the storm without her pay. Squaring her shoulders, she decided to be faster, more invisible than ever. She could clean the executive floor in 20 minutes if he stayed in his office. She pressed the button for the service elevator. The private elevator doors opened onto the penthouse lobby just as Amara was stepping out of the service elevator, her cart clattering slightly. They saw each other at the same time. The world outside chose that exact moment to unleash its full fury. A deafening crack of thunder shook the very foundations of the tower. The lights flickered violently. For a heartbeat, they simply stared at each other, caught in the sudden, intimate space of the hallway, the only two people on the top of the world in the middle of a tempest. Chinex recovered first. Amara, I didn't expect. You're working in this weather? The job must be done, sir, she said, her voice barely audible over the drumming of rain on glass. She moved to turn her cart around, to retreat back into the service elevator and give him a wide berth. Nonsense, he said, a strange impulse seizing him. He gestured to the open door of his luxurious private elevator. It's faster. I'm going back down anyway. I'll ride with you. It was an order masquerading as an offer. Every instinct in Amara's body screamed to refuse. To get into that small, plush, intimate box with him was to step directly into the lion's den. But to refuse a direct, seemingly benign request from the CEO was a breach of protocol she couldn't justify. Her hesitation lasted a second too long. He held the door, his expression unreadable. Another tremendous boom of thunder rattled the windows. The decision was made for her. With a stiff nod, she abandoned her cart and stepped into the elevator, pressing herself against the far mirrored wall. Chinex stepped in after her. The doors slid shut with a whisper-soft hiss. The silence inside was immediate and profound. A vacuum sealed against the roaring storm outside. They were encased in polished wood, brushed steel, and their own unspoken history. Then came the sound. A sharp, metallic crunch, like the jaws of a giant trap snapping shut. The elevator jarred to a halt so violent Amara was thrown off her feet and Chinex stumbled into the handrail. The lights died, plunging them into absolute, suffocating blackness. A moment of pure, primal panic. Then, with a weak hum, the emergency battery kicked in, casting a single, dim, amber light over their faces, pale with shock. The storm was locked out. They were trapped, together. The emergency light was a sickly, jaundiced yellow, carving their faces out of the oppressive darkness. It didn't illuminate. It painted, casting long, distorted shadows that danced with every faint creak of the stranded elevator. The roar of the storm was now a muffled, distant monster, making their metal prison feel both terrifyingly fragile and claustrophobically solid. The first 60 seconds were spent in pure animal instinct. Chinex's body moved before his mind could process, his hand slamming against the alarm button. A harsh electronic bleat echoed in the tiny space, a sound meant for fire drills and minor inconveniences, utterly pathetic against their circumstance. It rang out, unanswered, and then died, leaving a silence that felt even heavier. "Hello!" he shouted, his voice too loud, bouncing off the mirrors and sounding strangely desperate to his own ears. "Is anyone there? The elevator is stuck." Nothing, only the muted howl of the wind. He found the emergency phone, a small handset behind a clear plastic cover. He snatched it up. Dead air. Not even the hum of a dial tone. The storm had severed them from the world as completely as if they'd been launched into orbit. He pulled his smartphone from his tailored suit jacket. The screen glowed to life, a tiny rectangle of false hope. No signal. He tried anyway, stabbing at Tope's number, then security. The calls failed instantly. He held the phone aloft, moving it in a slow arc, a ridiculous primal gesture against the indifference of physics and technology. Amara had not made a sound. She stood perfectly still, her back pressed against the cool mirrored wall as if trying to merge with it and disappear. Her arms were wrapped tightly around her middle, her hands clenched into fists. She was breathing in short, controlled bursts through her nose, a technique she used to calm her nerves when her sewing machine jammed or a client was difficult. It was not working. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. Chinek's frustration mounted, tinged with a rising edge of panic he hadn't felt since his earliest days. When his entire company was a laptop in a coffee shop and a single failed server could have ended everything. He was a man of control, of solutions. There was always a number to call, a person to summon, a button to press that made things happen. Here, in this box, his power, his influence, his wealth, it was all meaningless. He was just a man. He turned to her, the movement causing the elevator to sway an infinitesimal degree, making them both freeze. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice lower now, stripped of its usual command. She gave a tight, quick nod, not trusting her voice. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the control panel as if it might suddenly spring to life. "The emergency systems will have alerted someone," he said, more to convince himself than her. "It's a standard protocol. They'll be sending engineers." Another nod. Silence. He tried to fill it, the quiet becoming a physical pressure. A storm like this, it must be playing havoc with the power grid. The backup generators should have kicked in for the essential systems, but he trailed off. The evidence of their failure was all around them. "Yes, sir," she whispered, the two words barely audible. The honorific in this context was absurd. It highlighted the vast, uncomfortable canyon between them that the elevator's confines had suddenly made impossible to ignore. He was, sir, trapped in a metal box with his employee. The sheer strangeness of it struck him. Minutes stretched. He leaned against the opposite wall, mirroring her posture. The initial shock began to recede, replaced by a grinding, awkward awareness. He could hear the soft rustle of her uniform when she shifted her weight. He could smell the faint, clean scent of her lemongrass soap over the sterile smell of polished metal. He was hyper-aware of every tiny sound, every breath. He made another attempt, grasping for the most neutral topic he could find. "You live far from here? I hope you have a way home after all this." It was a benign, boss-like question, but in the intimacy of the dim, stranded space, it felt like a profound intrusion. Amara's gaze flickered to him for a fraction of a second before returning to a spot on the floor. "I will manage, sir." The wall was back up, polished and impenetrable. Her politeness was a shield, and she was holding it tightly between them. Chinex felt a fresh wave of the same frustration that had plagued him for weeks. They were alone, truly alone, for the first time, and she was treating him with the same sterile deference she used when emptying his bin. He fell silent again, watching her. He saw the way her jaw was clenched, the way she refused to let her fear show. Her pride was a tangible force in the elevator, as solid as the walls. And in that moment, Chinedu Okonkwo, Billionaire CEO, realized he was not trapped with Amara, the cleaner. He was trapped with a woman whose fortitude, in the face of genuine fear, was far more impressive than his own frustrated phone waving. And he had absolutely no idea how to reach her. The silence was no longer just an absence of sound. It had become a thick, woolen blanket, smothering them. The initial adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a raw, grating awareness of their predicament. The elevator gave another faint, ominous groan, settling infinitesimally. Amara flinched, a quick, sharp intake of breath the only sign of her terror. Chinex watched her. He saw the fierce determination in the set of her jaw, the way her knuckles were white where she gripped her elbows. This wasn't the serene, untouchable ghost who cleaned his office. This was a woman, scared and trapped, and her refusal to show it was more revealing than any tears could have been. His own frustration, the kind that came from hitting a wall over and over, finally boiled over. He wasn't a patient man. He was a man of action, and this silent, polite standoff was a form of torture. He let out a long, slow sigh, a sound of utter defeat that was completely unguarded. Then, in a move that would have shocked anyone who knew him, he simply slid down the wall he was leaning against, his expensive suit trousers scraping against the metal, and sat on the floor of the elevator. He rested his arms on his knees, looking less like a titan of industry and more like a tired, bewildered man. The shift in posture was so unexpected, so profoundly human, that Amara's eyes were drawn to him despite herself. "You know, Amara," he began, his voice low and devoid of its usual CO cadence. It was just a voice, tired and slightly rough. "You are, without a doubt, the most difficult negotiation I have ever encountered." The statement was so absurd, so utterly out of place, that it bypassed her defenses. Her carefully constructed wall of protocol had no response for it. A faint line appeared between her brows. "Negotiation, sir?" "Yes, a negotiation." He gestured vaguely around the dim cabin. "Every day, I negotiate multi-million-dollar deals. I convince hardened investors to part with their money. I persuade governments to change policies. But you..." He looked up at her, and for the first time, there was no calculation in his gaze, only a genuine, baffled curiosity. "You remain a complete mystery. I can't get a single term settled." He was speaking to her not as a boss to an employee, but as one puzzle to another. The shift was so disarming that her own posture loosened a fraction. She was still standing, but the rigid tension in her shoulders eased. "This is not a negotiation, sir," she said, but her tone was less guarded, more confused. "Then what is it?" He asked, the question simple and direct. "Why do you look at me like I'm a threat, like I'm about to, I don't know, pounce? Have I ever been anything but persistently appreciative?" He almost smiled at his own choice of words. The directness of the question, the vulnerability in his admission of failure, was the chisel that finally found a hairline fracture in her fortress. The words came out before she could stop them, sharp and honed by a lifetime of lessons. "You are the CEO. I clean your office. There is a line." She hugged herself tighter. "My mother taught me never to blur lines with men like you. It never ends well for the cleaner." The statement landed in the small space with the weight of a truth he had never been forced to consider. "Men like you." He heard the stories embedded in that phrase, the assumptions, the history. It wasn't about him, Chinidu, personally. It was about what he represented. Power, privilege, a whimsical attention that could giveth and, just as easily, taketh away. Her silence hadn't been a game. It had been a survival strategy. For the first time, Chinek saw his own actions from her side of the line. The late nights, the expensive gifts, the dropped money. He hadn't been courting. Had been testing, prodding like a child poking a strange animal with a stick. He felt a hot flush of shame. Her resistance wasn't a rejection of him. It was a defense against everything he embodied. "Men like me," he repeated softly, not as a challenge, but as an echo. He was truly seeing her, not as an object of fascination, but as a person with a history, with rules, with a mother's wisdom guiding her. The dynamic in the elevator had irrevocably shifted. The predator was gone. In its place was a man who had just been handed a mirror and didn't entirely like what he saw. The crack in her wall had revealed not a weakness, but a strength he was only beginning to understand. The words, "men like you," hung in the air between them, not as an accusation, but as a simple, stark fact. The truth of it settled over Chinek's, heavy and uncomfortable. The dim emergency light now felt like a spotlight on his own blindness. He had been so focused on the puzzle of her, had never considered the landscape the puzzle existed in. He didn't try to defend himself. For the first time in a long time, Chinidu Okonkwo had no counter-argument, no persuasive spin. He just sat on the floor of the elevator, the cold seeping through his fine wool trousers, and absorbed the truth. "Tell me," he said, his voice quiet, stripped bare of its authority. It was an invitation, not a demand. What does your mother know about men like me? Amara was still standing, but the defensive grip around her own body had loosened. His reaction, the lack of ego, the genuine contemplation, was disarming. No one had ever asked her to explain the rules before. They were just expected to be understood. She took a slow breath, the first deep one since the elevator had stopped. She was a private nurse. For many rich families in Victoria Island and Ikoyi, her eyes were fixed on a point on the wall, seeing a different time. She saw things, wives replaced by younger, shinier models, house helps, used and then thrown away when they became a complication. She said the attention of a powerful man is like a firework. It is bright and exciting for a moment, but it always leaves behind darkness and smoke. Chinex said nothing. He just listened. She worked her whole life so I could have more. Amara continued, her voice gaining a subtle strength as she spoke of her family. So I could go to university, study design. The word design came out with a wistful pride. But when my father died, the money, it went to other things. So this job, she gestured vaguely around the elevator, meaning the cleaning, the tower, everything. This is not my life. It is a means to an end. Every naira I save is for my registration, for my fabrics, for my own shop. Amara Designs. She said the name of her dream with a quiet reverence that made Chinex's own corporate achievements feel hollow and loud. I cannot afford complications, she said, finally looking directly at him. Her gaze was clear and unwavering. I cannot afford to be a story someone tells at a party. My reputation, my focus, it is all I have. Your world, sir, is full of fireworks. Mine cannot withstand the smoke. The fortress wasn't just made of pride. It was made of necessity. It was built brick by brick with deferred dreams and a mother's hard-won wisdom. He had been trying to scale its walls with the wrong tools entirely. The silence that followed was different. It was respectful, absorbing. Then something shifted in him. A need to reciprocate, to offer a piece of his own truth in exchange for the one she had just given him. It wasn't strategy. It was fairness. My father was a teacher, Chinex said, the statement feeling foreign on his tongue. He never spoke about this. A brilliant man who believed knowledge was the only true wealth. He died deeply in debt, his brilliance meaning nothing to the loan sharks. He picked at an invisible thread on his knee. This, he gestured around them, indicating the elevator, the tower, his entire empire. All of this, it started as a rebellion against that powerlessness. I wanted a fortress of my own, made of money and influence, something no one could ever take away. He looked up at her, a faint, tired smile on his face. It is a very tall fortress, very quiet at the top, and sometimes it feels like I'm just as trapped inside it as I am in this elevator right now. It was the most honest thing he had said to another person in years. He had confessed a vulnerability that would have shocked his board of directors. He wasn't the billionaire in that moment. He was just Chinedu, the boy who'd watched his father be broken and had built a monument to never feeling that way again. Amara listened. She heard not the boast of a self-made man, but the confession of loneliness. She saw the faint shadows under his eyes, not from lack of sleep, but from the weight of the crown he wore. The dynamic had completely inverted. The pursuer and the pursued had vanished. They were just two people, stranded in the dark, who had unexpectedly laid down their weapons and shown each other the maps to their respective fortresses. The air, once thick with tension, was now charged with a new, fragile, and terrifying thing: understanding. The confessions had carved out a new space between them, a fragile bubble of truce suspended in the amber gloom. The storm's fury seemed to have receded, or perhaps they had simply grown accustomed to its distant roar, a soundtrack to their unexpected intimacy. They weren't talking about the weather or the company anymore. They were talking about fathers and dreams, about fortresses and the loneliness inside them. Amara had slowly, tentatively, slid down the opposite wall to sit on the floor, mirroring his posture. The physical descent felt symbolic. She was no longer standing guard. The space between them was still a chasm, but now they were sitting on its edges, looking across instead of turning away. Chinex told her about the early days in the cybercafe, the taste of cheap instant noodles and the thrill of a first tiny investment. She spoke of the first dress she ever made, the wonky seams and the overwhelming pride of creating something from nothing. He laughed, a genuine, uncalculated sound that seemed to surprise even him. She offered a small, real smile in return, the first he had ever seen from her, and it felt like the sun breaking through the storm clouds. For a few precious minutes, the elevator wasn't a trap. It was a sanctuary, the only place in the world where Chinedu Okonkwo wasn't a CEO and Amara wasn't a cleaner. They were just Chinedu and Amara. Then, the universe reminded them of its indifference. It started as a deep, metallic groan, a sound of straining tendons and protesting steel from somewhere deep in the elevator shaft. It was a different sound from the initial crash. Deeper, more visceral. The entire cab shuddered, not a violent jerk, but a sickening, swaying lurch, as if the cables holding them had slipped a crucial inch. The fragile bubble shattered. The emergency light flickered wildly, plunging them into heart-stopping blackness for 2 full seconds before sputtering back to life. Amara's composure broke. A sharp, terrified gasp escaped her lips. The floor beneath her felt treacherously unstable. Instinctively, she scrambled to get her feet under her, to find solid purchase, but the elevator swayed again with a nauseating tilt. She lost her balance completely, stumbling forward from her crouched position with a cry that was pure, undiluted fear. Chinex moved on an impulse that was faster than thought. There was no calculation, no strategy. It was pure, protective instinct. He surged up from the floor, his own balance precarious on the shifting floor. His arms shot out, catching her before she could crash into the hard metal handrail or the mirrored wall. He caught her firmly around her waist and shoulders, pulling her against him to absorb her momentum. And then, everything stopped. The elevator settled with a final, ominous creak, returning to its grim stability. The light steadied, but the world had changed. She was in his arms. He could feel the frantic, bird-like flutter of her heart against his chest. He could feel the delicate architecture of her shoulder blades under his palm, the warm, solid reality of her waist under his other arm. The scent of lemongrass and clean cotton filled his senses, overwhelming the sterile air. Amara was frozen, her hands splayed against his chest, not pushing him away, but bracing herself. Her breath came in short, sharp pants against the fabric of his suit. The fear of the fall was instantly, completely, replaced by the shock of the catch, of his proximity, of the solid, undeniable strength of him. Time stretched, elastic and surreal. The past hour of whispered confessions hung in the air around them, making this touch something entirely different from what it would have been an hour before. This wasn't the touch of a CEO and his employee. This was the touch of Chinedu and Amara. He could feel the fine tremor that ran through her body. He didn't loosen his hold, but he softened it, his grip becoming less about preventing a fall and more about holding. His thumb, of its own volition, moved in a tiny, almost imperceptible circle on her back, a silent gesture of reassurance. She didn't pull away. Her head was tilted back, her eyes wide, searching his face in the dim light. The fear was still there, but it was now mixed with a dawning, breathtaking awareness. The walls were down. The fortress gates were open. The space between them had been closed not by strategy or pursuit, but by sheer, unpredictable circumstance. His own breath hitched. The carefully constructed world of Chinedu Chinex Okonkwo, the deals, the empire, the isolation, faded into irrelevance. There was only this, her, the feel of her in his arms, the profound silence that screamed louder than the storm. The moment hung, balanced on a knife's edge. Every second that she didn't move away was a second that stretched into eternity, charged with a possibility so terrifying and exhilarating it made the stalled elevator feel like the most stable ground he had ever stood on. The world had shrunk to the space between their bodies. The groan of metal, the distant storm, the faint hum of the emergency light. It all faded into a dull roar, a background static to the thunderous pulse he felt in his own veins. He could feel the frantic rhythm of her heart where her chest pressed against his, a wild counterpoint to his own. He looked down at her. Her face was tilted up, her eyes wide, not with fear of the elevator anymore, but with a dazed, breathtaking shock. The dim, amber light caught the sheen of unshed tears on her lashes and the soft part of her lips. She was breathing him in, her hands still flat against his chest, neither pushing him away nor pulling him closer. They were simply anchored. The air between them was no longer just air. It was charged, thick with every unspoken word, every glance head stolen, every defense shed mounted. It was heavy with the confessions of dead fathers and deferred dreams. The past hour had stripped them both bare, and now there was nothing left but this raw, terrifying proximity. Amara. Her name was not a question. It was a breath, a prayer, a statement of fact. It was the only word left in the universe. His voice was rough, scraped raw with an emotion so vast he had no name for it. He saw the flicker in her eyes, a last, fleeting instinct to retreat, to rebuild the wall. But it was too late. The foundation had already been shattered by shared fear and understood loneliness. The wall couldn't be rebuilt in this space, with his arms around her and the truth hanging between them. He didn't ask. He knew with a certainty that went deeper than strategy, deeper than thought, that to ask would be to break the spell. It would be to reintroduce the world of CEOs and cleaners, of negotiation and power. This was something else. This was inevitable. He lowered his head slowly, giving her every second, every millimeter of space to refuse him, to turn her head, to utter the word that would stop him. She didn't. Her eyes fluttered shut. The first brush of his lips against hers was impossibly soft. A whisper, a test. It was not the kiss of a man who took what he wanted. It was the kiss of a man who had finally found something he was afraid to break. He felt her jolt, a tiny electric shock at the contact, and he held himself perfectly still, waiting. And then the miracle, the tension in her hands, braced against his chest, melted. Her fingers uncurled, and instead of pushing, one hand slid slowly up over the lapel of his suit until her fingertips came to rest, trembling on the side of his jaw. The touch was feather-light, but it sent a seismic shock through his entire body. It was permission. It was acceptance. It was an answer. He deepened the kiss, no longer a question but a conversation. It was a kiss that spoke of months of frustration and fascination. It was a kiss that apologized for every clumsy, arrogant attempt had ever made. It was a kiss that thanked her for her strength, for her wisdom, for seeing the man behind the fortress. And she kissed him back. Her response was shy at first, then surer, meeting the slow, deliberate pressure of his mouth with a softness that utterly undid him. It was a kiss that held all her buried dreams and her quiet strength. It was a surrender that felt not like defeat, but like a choice, finally, freely made. The elevator, their prison, vanished. There was no storm, no tower, no past, no future. There was only the warm lemongrass scent of her, the softness of her lips, the feel of her fingertips on his skin, and the stunning, silent understanding that passed between them. A bridge built across the chasm, strong and sure and real. When they finally broke apart, breathless and trembling, the world rushed back in slowly. The creak of the elevator, the hum of the light. But it was a different world. They were different people. They stayed there, foreheads resting together, his arms still around her, her hands still on his jaw, breathing each other's air, saying nothing at all. The kiss had said everything. The kiss ended, but the world it had created did not. They remained forehead to forehead, breathing in sync, the air between them warm and shared. Chinex could feel the gentle tremor in her hands where they now rested on his shoulders, and he was certain she could feel the wild, unsteady hammering of his own heart. The elevator was no longer a trap. It was a cocoon, a secret universe where the only things that existed were the feel of her and the profound silence that had swallowed them whole. He didn't know how much time passed. A minute? An hour? It was irrelevant. He brushed a stray thread from her headscarf, his touch achingly gentle. She didn't flinch. She simply looked at him, her eyes wide, dark pools in the dim light, reflecting a wonder that mirrored his own. It was Amara who finally broke the silence, her voice a husky whisper. The elevator. The spell wasn't broken, but reality began to gently reassert itself. Chinex let out a soft, breathy laugh, the sound strange and wonderful to his own ears. What elevator? He murmured, earning a small, shaky smile from her. But the universe, it seemed, had decided their time in the cocoon was over. Without warning, the main lights above them flickered once, twice, and then blazed to life with a harsh, fluorescent intensity. Both of them winced, blinking against the sudden invasion. A deep, mechanical whirring sound started up from somewhere in the shaft, the sound of systems rebooting. Then, a voice, tinny and distorted, crackled from the emergency speaker they had thought was dead. Tenants to Penthouse Elevator 1. Is anyone in there? Please respond. The sound was like a bucket of cold water. Amara's hands slipped from his shoulders as if she'd been burned. In an instant, the distance returned to her posture, her gaze dropping from his. The moment shattered around them. Chinex felt the loss like a physical blow. He cleared his throat, his own CO mask instinctively snapping back into place, though it felt tight and unfamiliar. He reached for the intercom button. This is Chinedu Okonkwo. There are two of us in here. We're unharmed. A babble of relieved and apologetic voices came through the speaker. Sir, thank God. We're so sorry, the power surge and the backup failure. We're working on the doors now. Just a few more minutes. The magic was gone, replaced by the frantic energy of a rescue operation. They could hear the shouts of engineers outside, the clanging of tools against metal. Amara had taken several steps back, putting a respectful, professional distance between them. She smoothed down her uniform, her fingers trembling slightly. She wouldn't look at him. Chinex wanted to say something, to reach out and pull her back into the reality they had just created. But the opportunity was gone. The world was crashing back in. With a final, wrenching screech of metal, the doors were pried apart, revealing the anxious faces of a half-dozen engineers, building managers, and his own head of security. The bright lights of the penthouse lobby flooded into the elevator. Sir, are you sure you're all right? Ms. Amara. Thank goodness. The questions and apologies came in a wave. As Chinex stepped out, he was immediately surrounded. He turned, looking for her. Amara was being helped out by a female engineer. She kept her head down, murmuring "I'm fine. Thank you" to anyone who asked. As she passed through the small crowd, her hand briefly, almost accidentally, brushed against his. It was a tiny, secret point of contact in the chaos. A spark. Then she was gone, escorted quickly towards the service elevator by a concerned manager, disappearing into the bowels of the building without a backward glance. Chinex stood in the middle of the bustling lobby, surrounded by people, but feeling utterly alone. The air felt thin and cold. On his jaw, he could still feel the ghost of her fingertips. On his lips, the taste of her. He gave terse, automatic answers to the building manager's profuse apologies. His mind was elsewhere. The rescue team began to disperse, the drama over. It was then that he saw it. A young junior engineer, thinking the crisis was past, had pulled out his phone. Not to call someone, but to quickly snap a picture. It wasn't of the elevator. It was of him, standing there, his suit rumpled, his hair disheveled, staring with a look of raw, unguarded intensity towards the service elevator doors just as they closed. Chinex's head snapped around. You, delete that, now. The engineer jumped, fumbling with his phone. Yes, sir. I'm sorry, but the damage, Chinex knew with a sinking feeling in his gut, was already done. In the modern world, a picture could be uploaded to the cloud with a single mistaken thumb press. He walked away, the manager's apologies still ringing in his ears. The silence of his penthouse office was deafening. He stood where she had stood just hours before, looking out at the now calm city. Everything was the same, yet nothing was. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that their secret was already slipping through the cracks of the building, racing through the digital veins of Lagos. The cocoon had been breached. The storm outside was over, but a different, more invasive tempest was about to begin. The front page of tomorrow's tabloids was already being written. The sun rose over a Lagos that was washed clean and buzzing with a new kind of energy. The storm had passed, but the digital tempest was just beginning to brew. By 7 a.m., the first headline hit the internet. Billionaire's elevator fling with cleaner. It was a grainy, slightly blurred photo Chinex, looking uncharacteristically vulnerable and intense. His gaze fixed on the service elevator doors. The article was a masterpiece of insinuation, painting Amara as a cunning opportunist in Chinex, as a bored playboy indulging in a downstairs fantasy. By 9 a.m., it was the lead story on every gossip blog, talk radio show, and television entertainment segment. The narrative splintered into ugly tropes. For him, it was a scandalous lapse in judgment. For her, it was a predatory gold-digging scheme. The siege of Amara. For Amara, the horror was absolute. Her phone, a simple device she used for work and to talk to her mother, began to vibrate incessantly before Shed even left her small apartment in Ikja. First came the concerned messages from Chioma and the other cleaners with links to the story. Then came the unknown numbers. First, reporters, their voices slick with faux sympathy, asking for her side of the story. Then the vile ones, the threats, the explicit propositions from men who thought she was now publicly available. The jealous rants from strangers accusing her of tricking her way to the top. She turned her phone off, her hands shaking. She looked around her tiny living room, which doubled as her sewing studio. The bolts of vibrant Ankara fabric, her sketches pinned to the wall, her second-hand sewing machine. This was her sanctuary, her dream. Now it felt like it was being violated, splattered with the mud of the outside world. She couldn't go to work. She couldn't even go outside. She was trapped all over again. Her mother called from a neighbor's phone, her voice tight with fear. "Doremi, what is this? What have you gotten involved in? I told you about men like that." Amara could only cry, the weight of the shame and invasion crushing her. Her mother's "I told you so" was the most painful blow of all. The boardroom backlash. For Chinex, the assault was more refined but no less brutal. He walked into his office to find Taupe looking pale, holding a printout of the headline. "Sir. The board is on line 1. They've seen the news." The call was a masterclass in corporate passive aggression. Chinedu were not concerned, of course. Your private life is your own. But the brand. Chinex is a brand of excellence, of aspiration. This salacious story. Our partners in London are asking questions. Projects an image of instability, a lack of discernment. His friends were worse. Omo, Chinex. His childhood friend Deli laughed over lunch at the club. A cleaner? Really? Could you not find a more discreet way to handle your urges? This is what happens when you play with the staff. Everywhere he looked, he saw the smug, knowing glances. He wasn't a man who had found a connection. He was a punchline. Cautionary tale. The headline Chinex charity case felt like it was branded onto his forehead. The fortress forged. The pressure should have broken them. It was designed to. It should have sent Amara into hiding, ashamed, and forced Chinex into a public retreat, perhaps a donation to a charity for single mothers to launder his reputation. But the elevator had changed them. It had forged a bond in the dark, a connection built on shared vulnerability, not social standing. The outside noise, instead of driving them apart, became a common enemy. He called her. She hesitated before answering, her voice small and scared. "Amara," he said, his voice firm, leaving no room for the doubt that was eating at her. "Listen to me. They don't know you. They don't know us. They are talking about characters in a story they invented. They are saying such terrible things." She whispered, her voice thick with tears. "I know. And I am going to fix it. But I need to know what was real for you in that elevator. Because for me, it was the most real thing that has happened to me in years." Her silence stretched. "Then, it was real. Then that is all that matters." He didn't hide. That evening, Against the advice of his entire PR team, he didn't slip out a back entrance. He walked out the front doors of the Zenith Tower, directly into the gauntlet of flashing cameras and shouted questions. Mr. Okonkwo, is it true you're dating your cleaner? Chinex, did she seduce you in the elevator? He stopped, turning to face the media scrum, his expression not angry, but deadly calm. Ms. Amara is a woman of integrity and talent who was doing her job when we were both caught in a terrifying situation, he stated, his voice cutting through the noise. The speculations are not only false, they are deeply disrespectful. There will be no further comment. It wasn't a denial of her. It was a defense of her. He had drawn a line in the sand. He was on one side with her. The rest of the world was on the other. In her apartment, watching the clip on a news site, Amara saw it. She saw the steadiness in his eyes. He wasn't ashamed of her. He was angry for her. The fear began to recede, replaced by a slow-burning anger of her own. They had reduced her dreams to a dirty joke. They had reduced a moment of profound connection to a fling. Her mother's warnings had been about being used and discarded. But he wasn't discarding her. He was standing in the fire for her. The crucible of public scorn was meant to destroy them. Instead, it was tempering them, melding their individual resolves into a single, unbreakable alloy. The world saw a scandal. But inside the fire, a partnership was being born. The public defense was a declaration of war, and the elite of Lagos waited for the inevitable counterstrike. It came in the form of a cream-colored, embossed invitation, the annual Children's Hope Charity Ball, the most exclusive, scrutinized social event of the season. It was a battlefield masquerading as a ballet, and everyone knew Chinedu Okonkwo would be expected to make an appearance. The question on every gossiping tongue was, who would he bring? The safe, expected choice was any number of stunning, socially approved heiresses or celebrities. Showing up with one would signal that the elevator incident was indeed a fleeting scandal, now corrected. Bringing Amara would be a declaration of all-out war. You don't have to, Chinex said, his voice gentle through the phone. They spoke every night now, long conversations that stretched into the early hours, their connection deepening far beyond the physical. It will be a den of vipers. They will be cruel and they will be subtle about it. I can go alone. Amara was silent for a long moment. She was in her living room, surrounded by the vibrant fabrics of her dreams. She looked at a sketch shed done of a gown, something bold and architectural, something that belonged on that world stage. No, she said, her voice firming with resolve. If I hide, they win. They will always say you were ashamed to be seen with me. I will go. The armor. She refused his offers to have a designer from Paris or Milan fly in. I am a designer, she stated, a new steel in her voice. For 2 weeks, her small apartment was a whirlwind of creation. She chose a bold, modern Ankara print in deep sapphire and gold, not the traditional, softer patterns often seen. The design was her own. A sleek, off-the-shoulder gown that hugged her figure before flowing into a graceful train. It was modest yet daring, elegant yet unmistakably African. It was not a costume. It was a statement. It was armor, woven from her own hands and her own vision. The entrance. The night of the ball, a Rolls-Royce pulled up to her modest apartment block. Neighbors peeked through curtains as Chinex, resplendent in a black tuxedo that complemented her colors, walked to her door. When she opened it, his breath caught. She was breathtaking. The gown was perfection, but it was the woman wearing it. Her head held high, her eyes clear and steady. That truly stunned him. You are. He struggled for the word. Radiant. The flashbulbs erupted as they arrived at the Eco Hotel. The crowd behind the velvet rope gasped, then fell into a hushed, frantic whisper. This was not a cleaned-up maid in a borrowed dress. This was a queen. Chinex didn't drag her through the gauntlet. He walked beside her, his posture protective but his demeanor making it clear. She was his equal, not his accessory. The ballroom was a sea of judgmental smiles. She felt the stares like physical touches, cold, assessing, and dismissive. A circle of socialites, wives of his business rivals, approached, their smiles sharp enough to draw blood. "My dear, what a unique dress," one purred, her eyes raking over the ankara. "So ethnic." Before Chinex could interject, Amara smiled, a calm, genuine smile. "Thank you. It's an original Amara Designs piece. I find the fusion of traditional Nigerian motifs with contemporary silhouettes to be a powerful expression of our culture's dynamism. Don't you agree?" The woman blinked, disarmed by the articulate, intelligent response. The script was not being followed. Another woman, sharper, tried a different tack. "It must be so fascinating, seeing all this from the other side. Quite the change from emptying bins." A deadly silence fell around them. This was the direct hit they'd been waiting for. Chinek's face darkened, but Amara placed a gentle hand on his arm, stopping him. She turned her serene gaze to the woman. "It is a different perspective," Amara agreed, her voice carrying a quiet, unshakable dignity. "One learns to appreciate the work that goes into maintaining beautiful things. It gives one a much deeper respect for the people who do that work, and a much lower tolerance for those who merely enjoy them without gratitude." The insult was so perfectly wrapped in grace that the woman could only stare, her mouth slightly agape. She had been outmaneuvered, her cruelty met with a wisdom that left her looking small and vulgar. The conversation shifted. A nearby investor, intrigued, asked Amara about her design influences. She spoke eloquently about Nigerian textiles, about sustainability, about her dream of a boutique that empowered local tailors. She wasn't defending herself. She was talking about her passion. And passion, when it is real and intelligent, is a force that gossip cannot compete with. Chinex watched her, his chest swelling with a pride so intense it was almost painful. She wasn't just surviving the evening. She was conquering it. She was winning over the room, one curious, respectful conversation at a time. As they moved to their table, he leaned close, his lips near her ear. "You are magnificent," he whispered. She looked at him, the mask of the serene warrior softening into a genuine smile just for him. "They are just people," she whispered back. "And you are my favorite person here." The narrative didn't just shift that night. It was rewritten. The photos that hit the papers the next day weren't sneaky, grainy shots. They were stunning, professional images of a powerful, gorgeous couple. The headline in the society pages read, "Chinex and his mystery queen steal the show." The charity case had been retired. In its place stood a woman of grace, intelligence, and undeniable power. Amara had met the world, and the world, for the first time, had been forced to see her. A year. It had been a year since the elevator, a year of navigating a world that watched their every move. The tabloids had slowly turned from scorn to a grudging, fascinated curiosity. The photo of them at the charity ball had become iconic, a symbol of a modern, defiant love story. Amara's small tailoring business, Amara Designs, had exploded, buoyed by the publicity and, more importantly, her undeniable talent. She was no longer the cleaner. She was a rising designer and the enigmatic partner of Nigeria's most eligible billionaire. But for Chinex, the public victory was secondary to the private one. Every day with Amara was a discovery. He loved the way she frowned in concentration over her sketches, the way she hummed when she cooked for him in his vast, rarely used kitchen, the quiet strength with which she handled her newfound fame. He loved the woman, not the story. He knew, with a certainty that felt as fundamental as breathing, that he wanted to build the rest of his life with her. The idea of a proposal was daunting. How does one propose to a woman who has refused every grand gesture? Flowers, diamonds, a skywriter over Lagos. It would feel like a performance for the public, a continuation of the clumsy campaign that had started it all. He needed something that was for her, for them alone. He found his answer on the anniversary of the storm, the return. He told her he had a meeting at the office that evening, a small white lie. He asked if she wouldn't mind meeting him there afterward. "There's something I want to show you," Head said, his voice casual. When she arrived, the Zenith Tower was silent, its usual hustle long ended. The private elevator, fully repaired and gleaming, waited for her. Taupe stood beside it, smiling, and pressed the button for the penthouse. The doors closed. Amara felt a flutter of nervousness. She hadn't been in this elevator since that night. But when the doors opened, it was not to his cold, minimalist office. The entire penthouse floor had been transformed. The lights were dimmed. Dozens of simple, terracotta pots holding vibrant orange lilies, her favorite flower, and soft, golden candles lined the path from the elevator to the glass walls overlooking the city. It was simple, beautiful, and deeply personal. There was no audience, no photographers, just the silent, glittering expanse of Lagos below them. He stood by the window, not in a suit, but in a simple, well-cut linen shirt and trousers. He looked nervous. "Chinedu?" she said, her voice full of wonder as she walked toward him. "What is all this?" "A year ago, in this building, my life broke down," he began, his voice quiet in the hushed space. He didn't move to touch her, just looked at her, his eyes serious. "I was trapped, and for the first time all the things I thought were important, the money, the power, the control, they were useless. They were just noise." He took a step closer. "And then I found you, or you found me. In that darkness, you were the only thing that was real. You weren't impressed by the billionaire. You saw the man, the one who was scared and lonely and trapped in a fortress of his own making." Amara's eyes glistened in the candlelight, her hand coming to her mouth. "They called it a breakdown," he continued, a small, wistful smile touching his lips. "But for me, Amara, it was the only thing in my life that ever truly worked. You didn't just fix that moment. You fixed me. You showed me that the strongest foundations aren't made of money or concrete. They're made of trust, of honesty, of a quiet strength that can withstand any storm." He finally reached for her hands, holding them in his. His were warm, slightly trembling. "You are my foundation. You are my peace. You are the most beautiful, strong, and real thing I have ever known." He took a deep breath, his gaze locking with hers, pouring every ounce of his love and certainty into it. "Build a life with me. Be my wife. Not for the world, not for a story, but for us. For the two people who found each other in the dark." He didn't get down on one knee. He didn't present a ring. Not yet. He was offering her a partnership, a life. He was asking her to choose him as he had chosen her. Tears streamed freely down Amara's face now, but they were tears of joy, of a happiness so profound it felt like a healing. He had seen her. He had understood her. This wasn't a proposal of ownership. It was a proposal of union. He was offering to build something with her. She didn't hesitate. She threw her arms around his neck, pulling him close, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes," she whispered against his skin, the word filled with more certainty than she had ever felt about anything. "Yes, Chinedu." 1,000 times, yes. Only then did he smile, a full, radiant smile of pure, unadulterated joy. He pulled back slightly and finally, from his pocket, he drew a small velvet box. But the ring inside was not a cold, perfect diamond solitaire. It was a unique band, woven platinum and gold, set with a single perfect sapphire. The color of her gown the night she conquered Lagos, the color of the sky after their storm. It was a ring that symbolized not a price, but a promise. A union of two different metals, two different worlds, forged into one unbreakable whole. As he slid it onto her finger, it fit perfectly. They stood wrapped in each other's arms, surrounded by candles and flowers. The entire city of Lagos spread out at their feet, a glittering testament to how far they had come. The elevator had been the end of his old life. This was the beginning of theirs. The news of their engagement did not leak. Chinex ensured it. He had learned the value of guarding their private world. They enjoyed a precious, secret month of bliss, the sapphire and gold ring hidden away, a beautiful secret known only to them and their closest family. Amara's mother, after a long, tearful conversation with Chinex where had spoken not as a billionaire, but as a man in love, had given her wholehearted blessing. When they were ready, they released the announcement on their own terms. A single, stunning, professionally shot photograph. Amara, her head resting on Chinek's shoulder, her hand resting on his chest, the unique ring clearly visible. Her smile was one of serene, profound happiness. His was one of proud, possessional joy. The caption was simple. She said yes. CVEA. The media cyclone erupted again, but this time it was different. The narrative had been wrested from the tabloids and placed firmly in their hands. The tone shifted from speculation to celebration. The headline that had once read "From Dust to Diamond" was now replaced with a simple, elegant, "A royal love. CEO weds his queen." The wedding. They were married not in a European cathedral or a Dubai hotel, but on the sprawling, sun-drenched grounds of his Ikoyi estate, transformed for the day. It was a magnificent fusion of their worlds, a declaration of their union. Vibrant, custom-dyed Aso oak in deep indigo and gold was worn by the groomsmen. The bridesmaids, including Chioma from the cleaning staff and a few of Amara's new clients turned friends, wore gowns from Amara Designs in a spectrum of sunset oranges and reds. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine and hibiscus, and the sound of talking drums mixed with a string quartet. And then Amara appeared. There was a collective gasp. Her gown was her own creation, her masterpiece. It was a breathtaking blend of traditional Nigerian elegance and modern haute couture. The bodice was constructed of intricate lace inspired by Yoruba weaving patterns, fitted to perfection. From the waist, it flowed into a voluminous skirt of the finest white silk, but layered over it was a transparent overskirt embroidered with golden thread in a motif that echoed the patterns of the Aso oak. Her veil was a simple, elegant length of tulle, held in place by a delicate gold hairpiece crafted to look like an emerging sun. She did not look like a cleaner marrying a billionaire. She looked like a queen, a goddess of art and love, finally stepping into her destiny. And walking her down the aisle was not a man, but her mother, tall and proud, her eyes shining with tears of triumph, not fear. Chinex, standing at the altar in a bespoke agbada that matched the wedding's colors, felt his breath catch. He had thought had known beauty before her. He had been wrong. They exchanged vows they had written themselves. He promised to always see her, to cherish her strength, and to be the sanctuary she had become for him. She promised to walk beside him, to build with him, and to always remind him of the man he was outside of his fortress. As the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the estate erupted not in polite applause, but in a joyful, thunderous cheer that was pure, undiluted Lagos. The talking drums kicked in with a triumphant rhythm. The final headline. The reception was a vibrant, noisy, delicious affair. There was champagne and palm wine. The news of their engagement did not leak. Chinex ensured it. He had learned the value of guarding their private world. They enjoyed a precious, secret month of bliss, the sapphire and gold ring hidden away, a beautiful secret known only to them and their closest family. Amara's mother, after a long, tearful conversation with Chinex where had spoken not as a billionaire, but as a man in love, had given her wholehearted blessing. When they were ready, they released the announcement on their own terms. A single, stunning, professionally shot photograph. Amara, her head resting on Chinek's shoulder, her hand resting on his chest, the unique ring clearly visible. Her smile was one of serene, profound happiness. His was one of proud, possessional joy. The caption was simple. She said yes. CVEA. The media cyclone erupted again, but this time, it was different. The narrative had been wrested from the tabloids and placed firmly in their hands. The tone shifted from speculation to celebration. The headline that had once read "From Dust to Diamond" was now replaced with a simple, elegant, "A royal love. CEO weds his queen." The wedding. They were married not in a European cathedral or a Dubai hotel, but on the sprawling, sun-drenched grounds of his Ikoyi estate, transformed for the day. It was a magnificent fusion of their worlds, a declaration of their union. Vibrant, custom-dyed Aso oak in deep indigo and gold was worn by the groomsmen. The bridesmaids, including Chioma from the cleaning staff and a few of Amara's new clients turned friends, wore gowns from Amara Designs in a spectrum of sunset oranges and reds. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine and hibiscus, and the sound of talking drums mixed with a string quartet. And then Amara appeared. There was a collective gasp. Her gown was her own creation, her masterpiece. It was a breathtaking blend of traditional Nigerian elegance and modern haute couture. The bodice was constructed of intricate lace inspired by Yoruba weaving patterns, fitted to perfection. From the waist, it flowed into a voluminous skirt of the finest white silk, but layered over it was a transparent overskirt embroidered with golden thread in a motif that echoed the patterns of the Osso oak. Her veil was a simple, elegant length of tulle, held in place by a delicate gold hairpiece crafted to look like an emerging sun. She did not look like a cleaner marrying a billionaire. She looked like a queen, a goddess of art and love, finally stepping into her destiny. And walking her down the aisle was not a man, but her mother, tall and proud, her eyes shining with tears of triumph, not fear. Chinex, standing at the altar in a bespoke agbada that matched the wedding's colors, felt his breath catch. He had thought had known beauty before her. He had been wrong. They exchanged vows they had written themselves. He promised to always see her, to cherish her strength, and to be the sanctuary she had become for him. She promised to walk beside him, to build with him, and to always remind him of the man he was outside of his fortress. As the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the estate erupted not in polite applause, but in a joyful, thunderous cheer that was pure, undiluted Lagos. The talking drums kicked in with a triumphant rhythm. The final headline. The reception was a vibrant, noisy, delicious affair. There was champagne and palm wine. Small chops and canapes were served alongside pounded yam and egusi soup. The guest list was a who's who of Nigerian business, art, and politics, dancing alongside the cleaners, security guards, and tailors who had been part of their journey. At one point, Chinex stood with his arm around his wife, watching the incredible scene. His old friend Deli approached, a look of genuine awe on his face. He clapped Chinex on the shoulder. "Omo, I owe you an apology," Deli said, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't understand, but looking at you too, looking at her, I get it now. You didn't find a cleaner. You found a woman who could be a queen anywhere. You're the lucky one." Chinex just smiled, pulling Amara closer. He knew. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in the same colors as the wedding, a late edition of a popular tabloid found its way onto a few guests' phones. Someone held it up with a laugh. There it was, the final, capitulating headline. Not a snide remark, not a backhanded compliment. It was a surrender to a love story that had proven too powerful, too true, to be twisted. In bold, elegant type, it read, "A royal love. CEO weds his queen." Beneath it was the subheading. "A story that began trapped in an elevator now soars above us all." Amara saw it and smiled, leaning her head against her husband's shoulder. The noise of the celebration, the flash of cameras, the whispers of the world, it all faded away. The only thing that was real was the solid weight of his arm around her, the gentle weight of the woven ring on her finger, and the infinite, soaring freedom of a love that had truly, finally, beaten all the odds. Their story had begun in a stalled elevator, but it was destined for the stars.